So here we have what we call the cage of oppression. In looking for symbols, images, symbols of the systems of oppression when I first started doing this work early on, going back 20-some odd years, one of the symbols that became very compelling for me, image, was this cage of oppression, which a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, actually developed as a way of presenting what we know as the oppressions, the isms, etc. What it says to me so powerfully is that structural disequality, as we know, which is what all of these isms are, actually has structure. That's obvious. It has structure. And this notion of a cage as a structure just palpitates. It's very powerful for me. So here we have this image of basically an animal cage where we're all locked into it with all of the various oppressions across the top. In using this cage, what we have are two tiers, two levels within this animal cage. The top level, the bottom level. On the top level, it is reserved for, in this analogy, this metaphor, this top level of the cage is reserved for those whom the system grants privilege. We use the term, often hear the term, oppressor or dominant, and we're using dominant in the work here, certainly with the IS thing. But for this particular framing, we prefer the term privilege. The top tier of this cage is reserved for those who are described, and I always have to watch how I'm spelling it here, as those whom the society grants privilege. They say these folks live in a socially constructed reality where they are granted, those who are privileged are granted access to power, and access to the opportunities, the resources, and the benefits of the society. There is no, it's not rocket science in terms of what they are, but let's name a few. What are a few of those resources, opportunities, benefits, power? What would we be talking about? Like what? Land, money, education, inheritance. I wanted to get that. Inheritance. Huh? Health benefits. Education we saw. Working rights. Voting rights. Right there. I thought it was access to employment. Voting rights. You got it. Okay? So privilege. The second tier, then bottom tier, is reserved for those, bottom tier, whom we often refer to as the oppressed or as victims. For this framing, we prefer to use those who are targets. Targets, folks who are targeted for the various oppression. Does that word, is that clear for everybody in terms of the meaning target? You get that? Okay. Who are, it has a T, who are targets of the oppression. These folks then who are target, those who find themselves in the position of target, live a socially constructed reality whereby access is either limited or access is granted to some but not others within the various targets groups, or access is completely denied. Access to the opportunity, to power, to the opportunities, the resources and benefits of the society are denied. I see a question, a hand here. Yes. So privilege in this sense is not, we are not talking privilege like we have the privilege of, living in this area. We have the privilege of even, to marry, whoever we want. The notion of privilege here is a very political definition of privilege. It is not something that you can earn. It is not something that is, it comes to you, innately in terms of you having to be born with it. You are, in terms of, we were born with privilege. It is something that the society grants to you in this instance. By mere location of where you are in the society. The right to vote. Yes, absolutely. But in terms of your various identities, how you're identified, whether or not you are granted privilege by the society, the system, is different from the right. Yeah. Yes, who's that? That is Tabinda.
I want to say, am I correct in understanding that here, by what we mean by privilege is the ability or the opportunity to exercise that right?
Yes. You are granted, yes, the ability to exercise whatever the rights are that exist. Whereas if you are targeted, one of the things that there are all kinds of blocks to you, moving towards accessing those, and sometimes those blocks include, well, why don't you talk to me a little bit about what are some of the ways that this socially constructed reality actually does limit or deny? What are things, what's used to deny people, to limit, to give to some and not to others? To rob you. The setting up conditions whereby your life is in jeopardy, your life is threatened, your life is the possibility of you doing what it is that you want to do in terms of access gets blocked by ways that are most important physically. I will say that for all of these oppressions, one of the significant ways of keeping people in line who are in the targeted is violence or the threat of violence. Okay? I mean, that is the ultimate way of keeping people blocked. But you can get into, I was trying to get into, there are all kinds of ways in terms of voting. For example, setting up, I'm thinking of a U.S. context, but I know that you have, various other similarities here. That setting up all kinds of political or policy situations that make it difficult for you to even register to vote, for you to even be considered to vote. Yeah, when you're saying what blocks, you get into some particularities of ways in which people build into the structures that could potentially grant you access, etc. Build in ways to block that access. So that's what we're talking. Yes, Edna.
And those blocks may not be obvious to the eye.
Absolutely.
It can be implicit, it can be taken for granted.
Yes, yep.
So I'm the government of a country, I may say, I uphold the universal right to suffrage. But if I don't provide facilities for those who are not literate to be able to exercise their vote, that's exclusion.
That's exclusion. That's a block. That's a block to you actually getting the access. And it has been done very consciously, even though you might not know the exact workings of it. Policies and decisions that are made, by bureaucrats and managers, but also by politicians and other, administrative forces in various institutions, etc., very much set up blocks that we don't even know about sometimes. But we know the results. The result is I go there and I can't do, or I don't have the access. Right. But in terms of a system of oppression, whether or not people are going and finding freedom elsewhere does not diminish at all how the system is operating within your country. Whether that's, again, some economic whims of change, that are sometimes things change, and the system says, okay, we were blocking you at one point, but we don't have enough people now, to do this. Or all of a sudden we have more jobs, we have a little more space, so we'll let some of you into employment. So that notion of access or denying access to some, in some circumstances, to some and not to others, etc. It varies, and it can vary. Now you're You're setting up a particular economic situation where we might see some variability in terms of how people can have access or not have access. Let's jump over here and then come across a little bit. Ableism. In this system, and now we want to work a little bit with language that's used, not slurs, not derogatory language, but the language that's used to describe people in the various categories, which what we want to be mindful of is language is also enrolled, if you like, in the system in order to sustain the system. And so, from the earliest age, how we're, taught to use language regarding those who are privileged and those who are targeted are very much a part of sustaining the system. So let's go to ableism. In ableism, the system then of oppression based on what? Let's describe it. Based on
The obvious ones.
the obvious and the physical, mental and emotional disability. How do we name the folks who have privilege?
Able-bodied.
Able-bodied. Let's say different words. Let's shout out. Able-bodied. What are terms that we use? Able-bodied.
Healthy.
Healthy.
Fully functional.
Fully functional. Come on. There's one word that I want to pop out. What?
Normal.
Normal. That's the word. Stop right there. Stop, 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 stop. Normal. Normal. My friends who are deaf do not consider themselves unhealthy, nor do they consider themselves not normal. As we're doing this exercise, bring a 6-year-old in here that you know. Your niece, your nephew, have them sitting here, around here, as we're doing this. Have the child who is with a disability, lives with a disability, or the child who lives without disability. Here, people in the privileged group refer to as normal. Listen again to what I'm saying about language. That child who lives without a disability is hearing, normal, that's me. Normal, that's not you. The child who lives with a disability is also hearing, normal, that's not me. That's you. So even our seemingly most objective language, neutral language, is supporting very much this whole system. Is language that has been developed by the well-meaning social workers and over, trying to make nice but really wanting not to offend. I have just a little challenge. Yes, differently challenged. That's it. Differently challenged. Different. Huh? And special. Is that what? Special. Oh my goodness. Oh, special. In the disability rights movement, many of those terms are rejected, even the new ones, and people are preferring to, it's a much longer thing, to talk about a person who lives with a disability or a person who lives without a disability as one of the most respectful, remember respectful ways of describing a person. A child who lives with a disability, not a disabled child, in terms of putting the child first. And it might sound a bit like quibbling, but you live in the body and the mind and move through the society as a person without disability and try to experience how these terms, come at you and hit you. Yeah, okay, so we can go. I'm going to come back to ableism a bit later when we talk about how we think about the privileged group when we are in the target group, but we'll move on for now. Okay, so heterosexism. The group, I'm sorry, we didn't go to target. In ableism, what are some of the terms that we use for those who are targets of ableism? Now you go back to crazy. Yeah, crazy. Abnormal. Disabled. Difficult. And disabled is one of the very difficult. Say? What'd you say? And you see, Dini was like afraid to say it. Stupid. She's holding it. Stupid. Yes. And it's hard, but it's our own, humanity and sensibility that keeps us from saying that stuff out loud. But again, moving through the world as a person, with a disability, it is not uncommon for them to hear that word out loud. Stupid. Stupid. So yes, these are terms that one hears.
God is not a privilege to get education.
But to staying with ableism. Maybe hold on. So you're saying if we have a person living with a disability who is a male and one who's a female, what's the difference? What you're trying to make? To have, yes, to have education. So while there are ways, thank you very much, this can get, this very complex, and of course the word that we all know is intersectionality. And so none of this is, none of us, and it also comes back to, in a different way that you were talking about, the multiplicity of who we are, and you were speaking of it in a positive way, but there's also the ways in which the systems of oppression are such that we live not one, oppression at a time, but it's integrated. So in that sense, you're saying a male who might be targeted in, generally speaking, as one living with a disability, still by virtue of being male, has access to opportunities, resources, so forth. So nothing is so simple. Thank you. So heterosexism, let's just stick with sexual, sexual preference, sexual orientation, etc. So just keeping it simple doesn't mean that the other is not also a vitally important piece of the topic. Given that based on sexual orientation, sexual preference, who is the group that has privilege? Heterosexuals, the other terms, straight. I guess that's it, heterosexual, straight. Are any other names in other cultures? No, well, yes, normal. Yes. Thank you. Again, normal. Woo. Continuing on. We're not going to, I want to look at lookism. This is very more particular to US, North America, and Europe. Let's look at lookism, sizeism. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. Lookism, sizeism, basically, what are you? Too tall, too fat, too short, too thin, too whatever. Yeah. How you look and your size. Now, it is not just a matter of what we might say cosmetics of how you look. Because in certain societies, by virtue of how you look, you get certain things that come at you in the form of insults, from the range from insult to violence. You look at the intersection of these things. We have, again, I'm quoting statistics from US North American culture, the number of, and look at this intersection, the number of women who live with disability and who are of heavy size, fat we call, who are big, large women, have an excessive number, or statistically, are more likely to be sexually assaulted. So, let's jump over here to then racism, caste, and for some we can put ethnic and ethnocentrism in here, depending again on the culture and where you're located. So, a system of oppression based on what? When we're talking race, when we're talking ethnicity. Skin color.
Religion.
What? Religion goes in. Language. Other? Okay, skin color, and when we're talking race, has also to do with physical appearance and features, hair texture, body type, all of those things can come into play. More around ethnic, what you got, Denny? What? Nationality, yes. And no, well, especially in terms of ethnicity, yes, absolutely yes, no, yes, and yes. Ethnic minorities, exactly. Ethnic. Okay, so, and let's name some folks who are privileged under race, ethnic, ethnocentrism, caste, so forth. Let's name some of the privileged. White throughout the world, Okay. White, European, and depends on where you're located in America. We say European American, so privileged. Who else?
Not just white, fair.
Okay, well, that's what I'm saying now. Now, but, does fair have privilege in terms of power and access in this realm? Or are we, hold on, are we down here with target fair folk who are considered, again, I'm going to use my culture, but it has real limitations here, but it's all I have to use as a real solid example. Within U.S. North America, African Americans, people of African descent, targeted. African Americans who are fair, who can be as fair as anybody in this room or more, can be Charlotte's, but is African American, will within the context of this targeted status be granted more access, sometimes depending on the historical moment, depending on where they're located, can have, especially if they are also fair and middle class in terms of the class, or upper middle class. African Americans who are fair, and the two kind of go together, there's a whole historical connection with that, will have more access to education, to certain kinds of employment, et cetera, et cetera. Are they still targeted? In the culture that we live, there's very, very strong chance that they still experience targeted status, but because also they can have the wherewithal to move up into the class status, there's a sense of privilege that one has. And then there's also, I'm going to push this a little bit, historically, just within this particular group of African Americans who are fair, can sometimes be so fair, have the class status that they will pass for white. They will pass for white. Hold on. Can pass for white and therefore will be located in the privileged group. Which all says, thank you again for another example of when I asked you, racism, caste, and so forth, system of oppression, based on what? And you said skin color, and you go to here, skin color. Skin color changes with the combination of genes, of DNA. And so the skin color changing, but also the class and whole status of European adding to the skin color puts the person in another situation. This has nothing to do with reality. Reality of life. This has to do with the reality of the social constructed reality. Because when we start talking things, it's as if, and this is how the world works. Yes, it is how the world works. But there's nothing innate or natural or ordained, by God or the goddess, by any of this. This is something that we, the human beings, then set up. And in that sense, in terms of colonialism, certainly white Europeans then dictate in every way what, who has privilege, who does not, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, of course, the children that will move to a different place. And the culture, what the culture does is enrolls all of us in agreeing, to this. Pardon me. So in your culture, in your village, yes, and so affirming these, the progeny, the product of this kind of union as somehow more privilege, more access, more whatever. So no society, of course, maintains any system for any length of time without somebody benefiting from it. And why some benefit and why some do not, there's just a multiple number of ways that we can talk about it. But one of the things that I want to offer you here is that those to whom privilege is granted by the society, one can then surface another term for who we're talking about. We're talking about the people who are valued by the society. So those are granted privilege, and it has been decided that they are valuable. And because they are valuable to the society, we will continue this system of advantaging them, making sure that they have benefit. When we talk about access to the opportunities, resources, and benefits of the society, I always like to add into even the benefit of the doubt. For those who are targeted by the culture, of course, it goes without saying, is those are the folk in any given culture who are devalued. word? Dispensable, that's another case, but just sort of doing the parallel of this kind of construction, those who are valued and those who are devalued. And the devalued is very important for me using that word because it's stripping away your humanity. Again, and I would say to you, you're right, but that is not an absolute. There are ways in which the culture does say you are dispensable. All right, and so now we're closing with one of the places where we already touched on. What are you doing? Are you trying to raise your hand to say something? What have we created here? Wonderful. Go ahead. Yeah, Doa, I love it. I love it. It's just so awful that time is finite. And so closing this out, especially in a group like this, this closing can seem sometimes a little anticlimactic or where to go. But it's also important for me in terms of looking at not only how these groups are antagonistic towards each other, but what is the link and the connection when we're talking about dismantling this cage and these oppressions and working towards liberation. And so one of the things that we always hold out, not necessarily at this point, sometimes in the middle of it, is that while ending racism, casteism, and so forth, it is very important for the targeted group to keep working in every way against the systemic oppression. The same with women working in every way against the systemic oppression. But it is our belief that none of these oppressions, not racism, casteism, will not end until a significant number of people of the privileged group also say stop and work in coalition with people of the target group, taking leadership from people in the target group to help end discrimination. We have talked about how I insist on men and boys as the framing that you use for sexism. It is our belief that sexism will not end on the face of this earth as much as we must and will continue and never will stop in every village, hamlet, city, and town that women are struggling to dismantle sexism. We will not stop. But it seems that it will not end on this earth until a significant number of men are enrolled in saying stop and working in coalition with women, which is happening now, which is happening. But that has to also continue and continue. I mean, that's a point that in some of our presentations we make big in the beginning. I didn't do it now. Part of what we like about this cage is we are all locked in here together. It is pernicious whether the privilege can go along for generations and all of any individual life and never know it, never care about it, etc. Those who care about humanity and how we live life on this planet understand that this is a trap for all of us. It is so wrong-headed